Hello and welcome to the Shanty Show. After quite a bit of a hiatus, we are back with what we are calling season two. James and I and the rest of the guys in the band have been very busy working on our new album, Departure, which will be available everywhere in March. And you can hear the first single off that, Holloway Joe, right here on this YouTube channel or wherever you get your music. We've got a great roster of guests lined up for this season, and we're going to aim to be releasing episodes monthly. We're kicking things off with a bang today with our first guest, Bob Walser, joining us all the way from Minneapolis. Bob is a folklorist, a musician, and of course, a shanty man. And he's done extensive scholarship into shanties with a particular focus on the works of James Madison Carpenter, who was a collector who was active in the 1920s and 1930s and collected over about 3,000 folk songs, 650 recordings, and included in that is a really important collection of sea shanties from mostly Northern England and Scotland. So we're going to talk about all of that. We're going to talk about Bob's journey through shanties as well. So Bob, welcome to the Shanty Show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And one of the things we love to just ask people right off the bat, we all found our way into this wild and weird world of shanties. Where did you first encounter shanties and what hooked you?
Well, I think the story really begins, for me, it has to go before the encounter with shanties to the fact that when I was a kid, I was told I had a really terrible voice and couldn't sing. And I literally had the experience of the choir director saying, stand in the back row and move your lips. And so I was told from a very early age that I had a terrible voice and I couldn't sing, and it was just awful. But I always loved to sing. And so my mom and I would sing together in the car, and she would tell me over and over again, oh, we're both terrible. So I had all kinds of imprinting that I was a bad singer from a very young age. The first thing that helped was hearing Bob Dylan and going, people pay to hear that? Wow, I guess I can probably do something like that. And I got a guitar and I learned a bunch of Bob Dylan songs and everything. But it was when I was in college, and I went to Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts, which was the home of the Five College Folk Festival. And there I heard John Roberts, Tony Barron, Cliff Haslam, all wailing away on shanties. And I said, yeah, I can do that.
This John's flashback, she said unto me, give me some time to play and blow the man down. There's a dandy black ball, and she said unto me, oh, give me some time to man down. There's a dandy black ball, so I packed up me six, oh, give me some time to play and blow the man down. So I packed up me.
That was the gateway drug with those guys.
It was Johnny Collins and Jim McGee and Tom Lewis for me.
Yes. Well, that's later in the story for me. So at the Five College Folk Festival, there were shanty sings or pub sings or something, and I went along to those, and it was like, oh, that's absolutely fabulous. And I've always been interested in education as well. And so I had a friend who was a elementary school teacher at the time, and I said, how about I come and sing some shanties with your students? And she said, that's a great idea. Why don't you come and do that? And so I did my first in-school program while I was still in college. I had a bunch of kids. I got some long closet poles and drilled a hole so that they would make a rough capstan sort of thing. It was complete failure, but it was my first attempt at trying to do it. There was no resistance. So they're just walking around in a circle and like, I don't get what this is about. But I used the illustrations in Bill Derflinger's book to try to figure out what that stuff was all about. So I learned a bunch of shanties. I loved the songs. They were easy to sing. I was engaged. And then I had a summer job, it was right after college. I had a summer job at a camp. And during my day off, I had heard of Mystic Seaport Museum. And I thought, I want to go check out the museum. So toddled off down to the museum, and there was a guy doing a shanty program there. And I knew all the songs that he was singing. And after the show was over with, I went up to him and I said, hey, that's kind of fun gig. Do they actually pay you to do this? And he said, yeah, and they're always looking for people who want to do this. And so I said, that sounds like fun. What a cool deal. But I was headed off to graduate school. So I went off to graduate school in Washington, D.C., which is part of the story as well, because I found I was actually going to seminary, to Episcopal seminary. And I said, oh, Washington, D.C., that's where the Archive of Folk Song is, and Joe Hickerson and people like that. And so I wound up spending an awful lot more time at the Library of Congress than I did up with my books. And about halfway through the year, I said, this isn't for me. So I called up Mystic Seaport and I said, hey, want somebody to come and sing shanties? And they said, well, you can come up here and have an audition. So I toddled on up there and had an audition, got the job, and that's what launched me into a profession of shanty singing. It was a great place to do it because Mystic Seaport at the time really emphasized not just doing the job, but doing the research to be able to do the job with some authority, I guess, historical authority, which suited me right down to the ground. So, yeah.
Do you remember who was the person that you heard at Mystic that first time?
But yeah, Stuart Gillespie. Yep. So the program at that time was run by Stuart Frank, who's the person who hired me. He was the person, you've probably seen the Folkways record where they recorded at Mystic Seaport. So it was through Stuart, the Shanties at Mystic Seaport album on Folkways. Stuart organized that, and Stuart Gillespie was on it too. So we had Stuart Frank and Stuart Gillespie at the time. So those are the folks.
We had the chance to perform at Mystic a couple times, and they do the thing where they get you onto the boats, and you're singing as you're doing the work.
Oh, what shall we do with the rum tally-ho?
Tally-I-O, tally-I-O.
Oh, what shall we do with a long tally-ho? Sing
Tally-I-O, yellow.
Way behind Miss Sally Ride. She's lovely up aloft, lovely down below. Row, boys, row, boys, row. She's lovely all the way, my boys. That's all you want to know.
Now, Tim, one of the other members of our band, and I, we used to sail tall ships all the time, and we'd sing shanties, but we'd never sung the shanties for work. So getting to do that for the first time and realizing, oh yeah, the pace of how we perform this is totally different. The amount of breath you need to be able to work and sing at the same time. Of course, the shanty man was a separate, singing the whole time, and then the men are just joining in on the refrains. It was one of those very visceral, oh, now I get it.
I am so glad you had that experience when Stuart Frank started the Sea Music Festival at Mystic, and I helped him run it the first year, and then I ran it for the next 5 years, I think. But the goal of the festival from the very beginning was there are all these people out there singing shanties, and they have no idea what the pace should be, and they no idea how the work actually goes. We want to get the singers off the stage and onto the deck. And that was Stuart's intention, and which I supported 100%. And so I'm really delighted to hear that you had. There's so many people over the years who have gone to that festival who have resisted doing exactly what you did, and which frustrates the heck out of me. But I'm not in charge, so whatever.
This is something I wanted to ask about. You've done a ton of scholarship into shanties and where do they come from. And I heard an interview with you, and you're saying, within the Madison collection, there's some 30-odd versions of, I think it was Blow the Man Down or something like that. And hearing the evolution of how this song would have evolved and different voices and different travels. And, one of the things that we've been fortunate to experience doing the Shanty Show and talking to people like you is, to get a lot of that background. And of course, there's a bunch of books behind me. We've been doing our own reading. We've traveled. So I'd say we're more on the spectrum of we perform the songs, but we want to make sure that everything that we do and everything we present has a connection to a deeper understanding of what this genre really is. Where do you stand on that? Because there's a lot of, without judgment, there's a lot of just sing the songs and perform it. The Weller Man, not really a shanty, the difference between the technical definition and the popular definition. How important do you think it is for people to, if you're going to be performing this stuff, to really get into a deeper understanding of what the genre truly is?
Well, I think that's the answer to that is individual, honestly. For me, like you, it's incredibly important, and trying to come to as rich and nuanced an understanding of the tradition as I possibly can that's what floats my boat. That's clearly not what floats the boat of most of the people who come to the Shanty Sing at the Dubliner. For them, the definition of a shanty is something. Well, for example, the opening song at the last shanty sing was Sally Rogers' "Lovely Agnes," because it mentions we'll cross Lake Michigan. That's a shanty. I mean, that's kind of, so they're in, they have a good time. There's a lot of enthusiasm, huge enthusiasm and stuff. But for those people, the questions that are of interest to you and me, some yes, some no. There are people who come to that sing who do their homework and present interesting material. When I go to that sing, it's rare for me to hear anything that I haven't heard 1,000 times before. People are, they're good songs. They bear repetition. That's fine. But I'm always interested in, well, who's doing something? Who's digging into the tradition? That's what the Carpenter collection was so rich. There was just so much there that was authentic, traditional material that was interesting and, worthy of an audience, but largely unknown. And actually, when I went to DC, that's what I was doing at the Archive of Folk Culture, or folk song at the time. So I would go in there, and at that time, this is, long before the internet. So the only way to listen to stuff was to physically listen to it there. And so I started cataloging all of the shanties in the archive, which were collections by all kinds of different folklorists. So I would get on the headphones and I would listen to recordings that Helen Creighton made, or ones that were made. There's a wonderful collection of material that Herbert Halpert collected down in the Mississippi River, which is riverboat songs. And there's some gorgeous singing and all this other stuff. And I started making little 3x5 cards for every one. And I made this big card file of all that material, which eventually turned into a database on my computer, because I was interested, what is there beyond, the ones that we hear all the time? And that was an incredibly rich place to go for it. And the other wonderful thing about doing that is you get a sense of the breadth of the tradition as well, and all the different kinds of things. So, and this summer, that was one of the things that I did that was really fun. I was part of the staff for Vocal Week at Augusta, the Augusta Heritage Center in West Virginia. And I had 2 classes that I did. One class was a shanty class. And we I brought lines for hauling and video or whatever. We did all that stuff, which is kind of, I'm sure you could do the same thing. But the other class I called Other Soggy Songs. And it was songs from shanty adjacent traditions. So work songs from stevedores, rowing songs, some of the French songs that were used for hauling vessels in and out of port, Menhaden songs, so forth and so on. And it was spent 5 days doing other soggy songs of all sorts, which was really fun. And we had a great time.
Cool.
It seems interesting, like the more we've done research into shanties, one of the themes that seems to pop up is they're not as narrowly defined as they have been presented in some cases, in the sense that a capstan could be modified into a halyard and vice versa, and that there's repertoire that would be brought in, popular music of the time or something that was familiar, and you could modify that into a shanty. So it's kind of funny that on one hand there seems to be that, and on the other hand, nowadays it feels like everyone has a point of reference for what a shanty is, but I find that a lot of it is a bit too wide or too loose of a definition. And kind of like anything that references a boat or water is a shanty. And it's like, well, no, not really. And I went to see a great Newfoundland band recently, Rum Ragged, just absolutely fantastic group. And I ran to East Coast acquaintance of mine, and he was talking about the shanties and our new single and all that. And he was like, a shanty, they all have that energy where you can, tap your hand, the same rhythm. And I was like, yeah. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, that's, strictly speaking, that's true of a capstan shanty. But there's, I'm like, stop. I disagree with the guy. Just say, yeah, absolutely. That's what a shanty is. It's that energy, But there's all these different sort of, I don't know how to say this. There's all these different sort of angles to approach shanties from. And certainly the historic angle is one that appeals to the likes of us. But some people are just drawn to that enthusiasm, I think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's our our Sing at the Dubliner, there is plenty of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you
That's
want
something that comes
to,
across.
Bob? Do you want to talk briefly about the Sing at the Dubliner? They're the monthly Sing.
It's terrific. It started a fella who's been singing shanties. There was a local shanty group here in the Twin Cities called the Eddies. I think they are no longer actively pursuing gigs. I'm not certain of that. But one of the members of that group is a guy named Phil Platt, and Phil thought it would be great to have a sing, and he went to the folks at the Dubliner and secured the night. And this is, like I said, I think about 8 or 9 years ago. And for a while, it was pretty small, but it's really picked up since COVID. It was growing nicely before COVID, and then obviously took a hit. And right now, it's roaring. Being the curmudgeon that I am, I sit somewhere in the room, and I often track in the course of the night how many actual shanties get sung. And the number is usually between 4 and 6 in the course of a night. And that is with 2 halves. Each half has probably 12 to 15 singers. So out of 30 songs, maybe in a night, I don't know the numbers. They post them actually online as a Facebook group, and they say what was sung. And I haven't looked at it recently, but they list off what the song, who sang it and what they sang. And then people, who are on the page will make corrections or say, actually, that song was written by so-and-so or whatever. But it's a thriving scene. There's lots of people, but if I can, there's the thing I hate most in the world: singing like this.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was years ago. I got to go to the Liverpool shanty sing. It used to be at the Baltic Fleet, kind of by the Albert Docks in Liverpool.
Sure.
And the first time, wonderful atmosphere. Second time, also wonderful, but they had an app, and they were all reading off of the phone. And I mean, I get having the cheat sheets and that, but there's something about looking down. I mean, that said, I think a lot of choristers look down at their sheet music, but I don't know. There's something that feels a bit more disconnected with the phone, perhaps.
Well, and I figure that if you don't know a song well enough to sing it from memory, you're not prepared to lead it. You could sing it. Sure, I can sing off of sheet music if it goes someplace and a hymn sing or whatever, and I can, sing my part off the music. That's not leading. That's following.
One of the things we've been having some fun with lately and started to bring into our live shows is this notion that, what was written down as these are the lyrics or whatever is probably just some abstraction from, I recorded a snippet over here, I cleaned up some verses or whatever. But if you think about the role of a shanty man on a ship, you're singing for however long the job went on. And you're probably going to be a bit more popular if you're singing about and riffing on stuff that was relevant to the sailors about maybe the time ashore, or you're bitching about the owner or whatever. And so there's elements almost of like today, what would be something like freestyle hip hop in that, right? This improv. And so, even that act of reading off a sheet or reading the phone in some ways takes away from I think what we would say is one of the more interesting core elements of shanties, which is this notion that they could be improv.
More. I couldn't agree more. That's, if you spend a lot of time listening to 30 versions, not just listening to, but transcribing 30 versions of Blow the Man Down, you realize, in actual practice, there was no set of words to these tunes. And of course, Stan Hugel wrote that, and other, after the first couple of verses, it was anything goes. And so I ponder about that because we have this notion of the version of whatever, and if it's a Michael Jackson song, it's whatever Michael Jackson recorded, or if it's Ian and Sylvia, Four Strong Winds, that's how the song goes, right? But that's not how shanties work. At least historically, that's not how shanties work. And so many times I'm sitting there in the Dubliner and somebody sings verse X of this shanty, and I say, okay, I know everything that's going to happen from here on out, because it's going to be that set of verses, whether it's from the Clancy Brothers or whatever the source might be.
Yeah, it's interesting because, of course, the shanties weren't weren't really intended as music. I think it is safe to say, like it served a purpose, and it was tuneful to some extent, as far as we can tell. And I think it was only when people started sort of trying to publish it and trying to sell sheet music of it, and they got kind of cleaned up and all that. But I've noticed a few interesting things. On our first album, we ended the first album that we did with a version of Bully in the Alley. And it was myself and Stefan's father, Paul, rest his soul, trading verses. And they were completely different sets of lyrics, and it was kind of fun. We just sort of bounced them off each other. And we did a shanty sing for the Sing Festival last summer, I think. And one of the guys that works for Sing did our version. So I'm hearing him sing one of my verses and one of Paul's verses and going back and back. But in his mind, that's the way it's supposed to be. And it was really funny to sort of hear that and be like, well, that's weird. That sort of got embedded all of a sudden as an official version.
Well, and I was listening to it going, well, these lyrics make no sense. There's no story here.
Right. Well, there's that too.
Right.
And actually to tie back into Mystic, I don't know if you guys remember this at all, but the second time we were there, Bob, you were there, and you got us, and was it the winch on the Charles Morgan?
Windlass.
Windlass. Thank you. Sorry. And I remember you asked me to lead a song, and I forget which song it was, shanty it was leading, and I was getting towards the end of the shanty, and I was thinking, oh God, I hope Bob, tells me to stop. And you didn't. So then I kept going, and I just pulled into the lyrics from another song. And after a while, you're like, are you going to stop? Or like, when's this going to end? And I was like, oh God, I was waiting for you to do that, So firsthand experience doing the actual motion, and firsthand experience panicking and thinking I've got to pull in lyrics from another shanty here. I've got a video clip of it somewhere. I'll see if I can unearth it.
Wow. Yeah. Well, sometimes just the devil in me has, when I'm singing, at a shanty sing or something, and I'll sing one of the songs that I've recorded, I will deliberately sing other verses or sing them in the wrong order or change some other aspect of it. And because why not?
Why not? Exactly.
Let's switch gears, because I'd love to chat a little bit about your work with the James Madison Carpenter collection. I mean, his songs are all over your albums. You've even got one called Outward Bound on the James Carpenter. I imagine if anyone's listening to this podcast, they're probably reasonably familiar with the likes of Hugel and Dorflinger. But could you tell us a little bit about Carpenter, who he was, and what his work entailed?
He's kind of an interesting character. He was actually from Mississippi, and he, in the middle of his life, in his 40s, he went up to Boston to do a PhD with the great Shakespearean scholar, George Lyman Kittredge. And in the course of doing that degree, he got interested in shanties, and he started collecting them. So the first chunk of the material in the Carpenter collection was actually, a lot of it was from the area around Boston, from Nantucket or Marblehead. And he also went down to Sailor Snug Harbor, which is on Staten Island in New York. And so he recorded a bunch of songs in those places, and got interested in this. And then he got this grant to go to England. And so he went to England for a summer and started collecting there as well. And his technique was to record things on a wax cylinder, but because the wax cylinders were expensive and bulky, he would typically have a singer sing just one verse or maybe a couple of verses. Then he would turn off the machine and use his portable typewriter to type out the text to the song. That was his technique. And unfortunately, he was using a dictaphone machine, and a dictaphone was designed for dictation. So the idea of a dictaphone was it had a fairly thick wax cylinder, and you would record a letter or whatever you wanted somebody to type on the cylinder. And then once that was done, you would shave off the top layer of wax and reuse the cylinder. Unfortunately, Carpenter shaved off the wax from the recordings that he made in the earliest days of his collecting. And so we have his transcription in some case of the music, and we have the texts that he had typewritten, but we don't actually have any sound recordings from the earliest work that he did, which is the work in this country, and from his first trip to England. Then once he got his PhD, he got another grant, and he went to England from 1929 to 1935 and stayed in England and Scotland and Wales. He never made it to Ireland. And the cylinders that survive are from that period. So he made those. It's 179 wax cylinders that survive that he made during that. So, but one cylinder would have multiple recordings of various singers. Some cases one singer, but in many cases multiple singers. And because the technology, he was using a machine that you didn't plug it into the wall. You wound up a spring. It was spring, which, not out of electricity in every place in 1929. So that was a good idea, but it was also a machine with an adjustable speed. And so sometimes he wanted to get as much material as possible onto the cylinder. So, of course, he slowed the cylinder down, which means the recording quality is rubbish. And, sometimes he did it at a higher speed. But that means that the contemporary sounds, if you listen to the sound files that are available through the English Folk Dance and Song Society website, you listen to those sound files, we don't know what the original pitches were because there's really no way to do it. We just have to guess.
I'm kind of curious if anyone's tried playing around with sort of readjusting the speed.
Well, we do that. I've had to do that to do the transcription because some of them are not very usable at the tempo or at the speed where they are. So, I've got them on my machine, and I would use Amazing Slow Down or some other software to speed them up slow. Yeah,
because I think something similar happened with the Robert Johnson recordings, and someone sort of proposed that maybe they'd been sped up a little bit, and when you listen to them slowed down, they're still wonderful and really intricate, but they're a little more how can I say, like, human, like it's like,
Sure.
that is more achievable if you are a very talented guitar player.
One of the songs I know came from the collection, and it's on our new album. We do a version that we learned from Jeff Kaufman, another Mystic connection, is Down Trinidad, which I think was he collected in Wales. So I like that because I'm Welsh. But what are some other songs that have come out of the Carpenter collection that are either particular favorites of yours or ones that have started to become part of the broader shanty canon and popularized?
Well, you'd be in a far better position than I would be to, I can only judge from what I'm seeing here or what I hear in other places, which is I don't do shanties outside of Minnesota a great deal. I get occasional invites to go hither and yon, but so I have no idea what they're singing in San Francisco at the festival there or wherever else. So you're really better qualified to answer that question. I know that our local favorites that are from the Carpenter collection would be Saucy Anna and oh, Hilo Johnny Hilo for sure. Down in Those Valleys gets sung a fair bit. Those are the ones from that album, and then the ones from the earlier album, Down Trinidad, yes. Pull Down Below does get sung from time to time. And
pull down below, I went to church, I went to chapel. Pull down below, away Eagle Alley. Pull down below, away Eagle Alley in the valley. Pull down below, and on the road I found an apple. Pull down below, and on the road I found an apple. Pull down below, away Eagle Alley. Pull down below, Eagle Alley in the valley. Pull down below, and who's been here since I've been gone? Pull down below.
Fire Down Below, there's a person here that's doing that one fairly regularly, which is great.
Yeah, nice. One of the so as we've done this show, one of the things that was a little bit of an aha for us, and transparently, we may have pulled on this thread a little bit too hard, but I grew up learning shanties through the English folk song and Morris dancing community, which you're also a part of, and so in my mind, shanties were a thing that was part of a British folk tradition, and then as we've done this work, it became pretty obvious that not only is the history much more complex than that, but in fact, there's probably a whole almost to a certain degree, hidden or largely ignored history of shanties that are Afro-Caribbean, even West African, African-American in their roots. And one of the glib comments that really stuck with me that was thrown out as we sort of uncovered this was somebody said something along the lines of like, well, yeah, because you don't hear any cathedral building shanties. Like there's not a tradition of call and response work songs in the UK. But one of the things I thought was really fascinating, and I hope I remember the name right, is you actually came across in the Carpenter collection some songs from the Firth of Forth that were call and response rowing songs, the dredge songs, or dredge, am I getting that right?
Songs, yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that? 'Cause James will find this fascinating.
Those are some of the worst recordings in the Carpenter collection. They're absolutely miserable. And so my job on the Carpenter thing was to transcribe all the maritime material. And I knew I had to do those, and I put them off till last because this recording quality was so horrible. So, but Carpenter had also tried to transcribe these songs. And so I had his transcriptions. He was not great at that wasn't his gift. And I kept listening on my headphones and looking at what was on the pages like, this makes no sense at all. I can't figure this out. And then, and as it turns out, after a while, I started to do my own transcriptions and figure out, I realized that the songs were in a meter of 5 counts. So nothing else in shanty realm that I know of counts in 5, but these songs do. And they're an echo pattern. So you have the lead singer sings a solo of 3 beats, and the people echo the last 2 beats of that. Hey, I see a ship, sailing on the sea, on the sea.
Ship sailing on the sea, and the mast is up, sailing free.
Like that. So it's this pattern, which we did this at Mystic. It was really fun because I'm like, okay, if that's how these songs are structured, and there are multiple recordings from different singers that have the same pattern. So I'm like, okay, well, how does that work? Well, actually, it makes perfect sense because they were pulling a dredge. So the dredge goes across the oyster scalps or the bottom of the Firth of Forth, and that's hard work. You're pulling this thing against the resistance of whatever's on the bottom that you can't see, but you're hoping that you're going to scoop up a bunch of oysters in the process. So when you're pulling on the oar, when the oar is in the water and you're pulling, that's hard work. But when you lift the oar out of the water and push it back through the air, that's a lot less work. So it takes 3 counts to pull and 2 counts to return the oar. So that was a fun thing to figure out. And we actually tried it at Mystic one year. It was great. Once I sort of, 1 year at the symposium there, I presented the songs as this mystery, because at that point I was just beginning to transcribe them and hadn't really figured them out. So I was kind of tossing this out to the assembled multitude saying, what do you make of these songs? So then I spent another year fussing with them, and I came back and I said, I think I have an idea of how this works. Let's try this. And we did, and lo and behold, it worked. And then actually, this was the great gratification. Once that had happened, I worked with some people in Scotland to bring the songs back onto the waters of the Firth of Forth, where they were sung for the first time in over 100 years. We had a bunch of people on the beach in Portobello, and a sing in a pub, of course. And we had 3 different groups. There's a program in Scotland, I don't know if you've come across it, called Scottish Coastal Rowing. And it's a deal where all around the coast of Scotland, people build boats, and they build them to a certain spec, and then they race. So all these communities have their own boat and their own team, and they go race against other ones. So there was a team from Portsmouth and a team from Portobello and another team from one other town. I can't remember now. And I worked with them. We did on Zoom things to teach them the shanties, and I gave them the field recordings to listen to and transcriptions so they could work with that. And then we had this event where they especially the group from Port Seton did a fabulous job. And they rowed across the Firth of Forth singing the songs and rowing their boats. And it was great fun. And there's an article about that I wrote that's published in a journal. So you can, if you want to follow up on that, you can find that.
That's really interesting. Did they refer to them as shanties or just kind of like rowing songs? Or
No, they were dreg songs because
dreg
you're
songs? Okay.
hauling the dredge. And I don't know what the Scottish pronunciation is. I'm saying dreg song, but in Scots it may have been dredge or something like that.
Right.
No.
That's interesting. I'm reminded of in St. Vincent with Tall 12 and the Barely Whalers. They were rowing and singing shanties, which was not the initial intention for shanties. They were deep water songs, of course, but they'd been modified for rowing. But it was interesting. We found out too. There were other guys that would row kind of down the coast to the capital, which is Kingstown, is sort of like at the bottom of the island, before the roads were kind of built, and it turned out they had their own rowing songs too. And we sort of asked, like, did you guys know those songs? They're like, no, we never did those songs. And they seem to be less, kind of less melodic, they were saying. Like, it was almost more like a bit more of a chant than the shanties that these guys were singing. But interesting that you've got these different sort of permutations that pop up here and there. But yeah, again, there's sort of these parallels with shanties, but it kind of begs that eternal question: what exactly is a shanty? What is not a shanty?
Well, the dreg song tradition had disappeared, and people had thought that had completely vanished because the Firth of Forth got fished out and there were no more oysters. So right around the turn of the 20th century, it was done. So the fact that Carpenter was actually able to find singers who knew these songs when he did in late 20s or early 30s is amazing. And subsequently, there were a bunch of Scots who went looking for these songs, and we heard about somebody who recorded them, but we don't know who that was. And it was, so there's a whole backstory to it. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, that's really cool.
I want to go back to how I started the question, because I got a reaction from you, Bob. But this notion that the roots of shanties were much more likely to have been heavily Afro-Caribbean, African-American, West African. What have you found in your work that either sort of supports or challenges that?
That's a great question. It's not something that I've been specifically looking for. And the trouble is that most of the source material that I work with is source material that was done by people who did not expect that. And like reading the stuff in Wall, for example, he had a bias that was very against that sort of thing. So there's a sort of a resistance to that. That said, at least one of Carpenter's singers was Black, J.S. Scott. I don't know what J.S. stands for, who was recorded in London. And in Carpenter's thesis, he makes reference to that. But again, and particularly for him, because he's a white guy from Mississippi, an older white man from Mississippi, there's a lot of filters going on there. And so, but one of the things that's really interesting is, you have people like Gibb and others who have done this sort of looking for the earliest mentions of the tradition that they can and digging into travelers' narratives and stuff like that, which is terrific, in terms of sort of documentary evidence of what's going on. An aspect of it that intrigues me, which I haven't done, but I hope somebody does, is to actually look for the musicological evidence. We, especially as North Americans, we have so much Black music influence in our singing, whether we mean to or not. That's been in our ears since we were little kids, right?
And numerous layers, if I may say, as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So untangling that is a really interesting thing. And I can't really bring anything to that party. I'm really interested in it, but my work has not, I acknowledge the value of that and am intrigued by it, but I can't really add anything to the conversation at this point.
Fair enough.
Mm-hmm. If I can jump in there, Stefan, it came to mind when you mentioned the Morris dancing is a sort of like traditional English thing, but really Morris dancing is a corruption of the word Moorish, as
Maybe.
you well know. Well,
Maybe.
that's one theory. One theory is that it's heavily inspired by what people in England at the time believed African style dancing might have looked like. And based on what I've seen of Morris dancing, I think that they couldn't have been more wrong, possibly. That's, but
I'm not going to disagree with that.
Don't take the bait, Bob. Don't take the bait.
But I guess what I'm driving at here is I think that if we look at what is English music, what's English music of the 1960s, of course, the Beatles spring to mind to me, and the Beatles are heavily influenced by black music, not only the rock and roll, but the jazz that their parents would have been listening to as well. And again, there's this sort of like numerous layers, and in the UK nowadays, like a lot of the music is very, very linked to Caribbean music and to African American music. So it's impossible actually to decipher which elements come from where exactly. It's been so cross-pollinated and inspired by African derived music for, I think in some cases close to over 200 years now.
Yeah, and hooray for that.
Absolutely.
How so James Madison Carpenter, he creates this collection in the spirit of scholarship, and it's ended up at the U.S. Library of Congress, I believe. So if people want to find this or dig into the source material themselves, is that the best way for them to do that? How would they go about finding it?
It's very accessible. What happened? The Carpenter. So I was part of a team initially of 6 people working with this collection, and we cataloged it because at the library, it's an enormous collection. It's thousands of pages of manuscript and all these wax cylinders and acetate discs that Carpenter copied the cylinders onto these discs. So there's just a massive material plus 500 photographs as well. There's just a huge amount of stuff. So when, as Carpenter was getting older, he realized his dream had always been to publish it, but he never was able to do that. And he retired, and he was living, I think he was back in Mississippi at the time. And Alan Jabor, who was then the head of the archive of folk culture, went down and met with him. And there's a audio recording of their interview, which you can find on the Library of Congress website. But he bought the collection from Carpenter and brought it back to Washington, D.C., and it went into the archive. But it was so big that the archive basically said, we got a lot of stuff. Here's a 3x5 card that says we got a lot of stuff. And there wasn't a lot more other than whatever notes that Carpenter had sent along with the collection. So it was a real big mess. So Julia Bishop, an English scholar, you might have come across her. She's the music editor of the revised English Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, English Book of Penguin Folk Songs, whatever it is, and a great scholar. She went to the Library of Congress because she'd heard about the Carpenter collection. There's a lot of stories about the Carpenter collection. We don't have to get into that, but she heard about it, went over there, spent some time with the collection, and eventually she wrote the grant that allowed us to do all this work. So there were 6 of us cataloging the collection. That catalog went online, but it was just the catalog and not the material at the University of Sheffield, and is still there as far as I'm aware. So there's a finding aid that you can search, and you can search by geographic location, singers' names, song titles, song types, a whole bunch of different fields that we coded this all using an archival standard called encoded archival description. So we did all that work. And then, but it was really frustrating for most people because they didn't have access to the material. They could look and say, oh, there's this song and it's from where my grandma lived or whatever it was. And then they had no access to it. So over many years, there was a negotiation between the English Folk Dances and Song Societies, Vaughan Williams Memorial Library, and the Library of Congress. And eventually, Library of Congress agreed to put copies of the recordings on the Vaughan Williams Library website. And so all that material is now accessible. The website there's an interface and you can search on various fields and you can actually listen to the sound recordings and everything. It's not on the Library of Congress website. It's on the English Folk Dance and Song website, Society website, but it's there. It's all available. So people can find stuff.
Is it open source at this point? Like, is it or public domain? There we are. Would it be good?
I believe that's the case. The recordings are all, from 1935 or earlier. And I don't know if there are any restrictions on it. I do know that some of the material that they have cataloged at the English Folk Dance and Song Society has restrictions on it. And so you bump into that stuff in the catalog and it says, no, you can't listen to that or whatever. I don't believe that's the case with any of the Carpenter materials. I believe that's all have at it.
That's good to know. We did, our latest album has a lot of sampling. So we've got, for example, Lead Belly sample. We've got a sample of Henry Lundy singing Bay of Mexico from the Lomax collection.
Great.
And getting the licenses for all of that was time consuming,
well, the Lomax
complicated,
stuff is
expensive.
Especially, yeah.
So there you go, James, for the next album.
That said, the recording quality,
right.
it leaves a lot to be desired. My wife would come into my study while I'm working on it. I'm listening. Like, I see why they have to pay you to do that work.
I mean, I'm kind of curious how James Madison Carpenter, why. I mean, it occurs to me he came from a very musical part of the United States that spawned blues and rock and roll and all this kind of thing. So I'm kind of curious if he devoted any of his efforts to that kind of music, that music, or what was it about music of the British Isles that appealed to him, or what was it about being in Boston that kind of sparked that? I don't know if you can speak to that.
That would be pure speculation on my part. What's the little piece that I can tell you is that, yes, he went to England. Yes, he collected all his material. And it's not just shanties. There's ballads, there are mummers' plays, there's children's folklore, there's all kinds of different traditional material. And he came back and he tried to get it published, and eventually, if I understand this correctly, he started putting most of his energy into writing country songs.
Okay.
Which I don't know that anything ever came of any of them, but
Okay.
Julia Bishop actually went over to Mississippi and met Carpenter's niece. Carpenter's long gone, but met his niece, who was the person who had all the material, the remaining material that Carpenter from his estate, and some of which she gave to Julia to bring back to the UK, so it would kind of reside with the collection and with the team, because since we were working on all that material. And he was doing other stuff, but country songs.
Well, I assumed if he's able to transcribe music that he would be musical. Do you know what he played or anything like that?
I think he was a singer, and he may have played guitar some. I don't. Julia would know the answer to that. I don't.
Yeah.
It's not a part of his life that I paid a lot of attention to, I'm afraid.
And how did you become aware of his collection in the first place?
Oh, that's fun. That was also that it was the year that I was in DC. So I went to Alan Jabor went to Mississippi and bought the collection in 1972. And I was living in DC going to graduate school the year of 1977, 78. No, 78, 79, because I went to Mystic in 79. So at that point, the material was new to the archive, but hadn't been cataloged. There was some information about it. So Joe Hickerson, who was the head of the archive, and Jerry Parsons, who was, I don't know what his title was, but he was the sort of public-facing person who knew about the collection, were the people who said, oh, we've got this material, and we've taken these, at that point, they had taken the discs, not the cylinders, but the discs, and made reel-to-reel tapes of them, which you could listen to. You had to go into another room, and you had to dial up on the telephone to the studio and say, please play tape number XYZ from start, time mark, blah, blah, blah. Then you listen on your headphones. So if you want to do a transcription, that was really a pain because the engineers didn't want to go back and do it again. And so it was kind of
wow. Okay.
but it was those guys, and it was also Jerry who turned me on to the Manhattan tradition, because he was from the Eastern Shore, and so he knew about that, and it was through him that I listened to the field recordings of Johnston Girls, which is probably, of the songs that I've worked with, the one that's probably achieved the widest distribution. And so it was due to those guys that I got access to all that material. With the Carpenter material, I didn't actually do transcriptions at that time because the engineers just didn't like it. So what I did instead was I did the initial cataloging of that material, because there was no index. It just said, I can't remember what the markings were on the boxes, but there was some number that had been assigned by the Library of Congress, LWO something or other. So I would say, I want to listen to LWO blah, 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 blah. And I would put it on, I'd put a piece of paper in front of me, and each song that came along, I would attempt to identify to the best of my ability, which was Shanties. Even at that point, I was pretty familiar with the genre. So that was the initial collection that I made. Then later on, I moved that information onto the 3x5 cards, and then eventually into D-Bass, if you remember D-Bass, on my computer. So I didn't do transcriptions of those songs then, but there were other collections in the archive where there were tapes that you could listen to on a machine right in the archive. And so songs from the Helen Crichton collection I transcribed, and some of this Herbert Halpert material I transcribed in those days, that Mississippi River boat material, and some of this Andros Island material from Lomax and Mary Elizabeth Barnacle, the best name for a shanty collector ever.
Amazing.
And so I was doing transcription in those days, but not Carpenter.
Okay. That just made me think how it's incredible how much effort people have put in, the last 100 years documenting songs and recording. And I remember doing my undergrad degree, and I found a book, the York University Music Library of, it was by Mickey Hart, who was one of the drummers for the Grateful Dead, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And he'd written this great book. I forget the name of it right now, but it was all about song collectors, all about like early ethnomusicologists. A lot of which were women, and a lot of which were going into these sort of remote, parts of Mexico or whatever to record, indigenous music. And I remember just thinking that, like, you've got this wax cylinder, which takes up, like, the machine takes up the whole trunk. And if it gets too hot, it starts to melt and stuff like that. But the great pains that people went through. So it just, and even your own stories of what it was like to just listen to a song, not that long ago, and to transcribe it. It's, it's just absolutely incredible. How easy we have it now. And I don't know that we're maximizing the access to everything we're really benefiting from all that hard work that people such as yourself put in. So I just want to thank you for your contributions to that.
Oh, the joy is to have the songs get out there. That's what it's all about for me. I love, that's why I make a CD. I don't make a CD because I want to get rich, because I won't. I make a CD because I want people to sing those songs. So get it out there into the world. And, that's for me, that's the big reward. I remember that time when we came to Toronto and we went into a pub and people were singing a bunch of songs that were from my work. And I don't know if the people in the pub knew that or not. And I don't even care, but it was really wonderful to hear the songs getting sung. Yay!
Yeah, that must be.
Bob,
wow.
Bob, what is, how can people find your 3 albums? What's the best place for them to pick that up?
Well, the easiest way to do is start with bobwalser.com. And there are links there. 2 of them are still available in physical format. One I've got to make available on Bandcamp or something, because there are no more physical ones left. But the website is a good place to start, and there's a email contact there, so I will happily relieve my basement of the excess boxes of CDs.
Well, I have one, maybe 2, because they're sort of connected, last questions. And it's a question we've danced around a little bit through this conversation so far, and grounded in the work that you've done. I heard an interview with you at one point. You were talking about having heard the same version of different songs, and you have a deeper understanding of what makes a shanty popular or why it took off. So my questions are, in your mind, like, what is a shanty, and then follow on, what makes a good shanty for Bob?
For Bob, well, that's a matter of, okay, the working definition that I use for shanty is a deep water maritime work song. Full stop. That does it for me. So if it's used for work, cool. And that doesn't mean it has to be a song that was only used for work. It might be a song that had another life and was pulled in and used for work. In that context, it became a shanty. So certainly, especially with calves and shanties, there's all kinds of stuff that was sung that was not remotely maritime or connected to the work or whatever, but they were still shanties. So for me, that's the definition. What makes a good shanty? Well, I will give you a two-part answer. The first part answer comes out of the work that I did for my master's thesis. And for my master's thesis, and at that point, I had this catalog of all the songs that I was aware of anyway, in the Archive of Folk Culture at the Library of Congress. So I took that and I just counted up how many songs, what are the most popular shanties? And I made a list of the 10 or 12 most popular shanties. And then I said, what are the characteristics that make the most popular shanties? Are there things that I can identify? And the obvious one is narrow compass. So they're songs that do not have a wide range. Rarely do they exceed an octave in their range, which makes sense for a work song, right? Doesn't matter where you pitch it. If you've got a narrow, if the song only goes to a fifth or a sixth, you can sing it kind of in any part of your voice and it will more or less work. So all of the most popular shanties had an octave or less, maybe one pitch beyond an octave. So that's empirically based on the sample is the Archive of Folk Culture. Is that representative sample? Who knows? But it's a sample that I had at the time, had access to. For me, what makes a good shanty? I think I tend to like, I like personally respond to things that open up the possibility for interesting harmonies. And so I tend more personally towards things in minor modes or different modes, or that have interesting suggested harmonies that don't finish on the expected note, that finish on a 5 or finish on a implied 4 chord or something like that. So but really at the end of the day, for me, I'm about empowering people to sing. That's what I love to do. So if I find a song that really does that thing, that's what floats my boat.
We are kindred spirits in that regard. That's what I live for.
This is definitely something we've kind of flogged to death here, but always curious about people's interactions with Stan Hugel. If anything springs to mind.
Oh boy, Stan! When Stan was coming over for the Mystic Festival during the time when I was running the festival, it was my job to organize not just his appearance at the festival, but other gigs around. So I wound up driving. There's a great experience I had with Stan. Stan really wanted to go and visit Martha's Vineyard, and he wanted to meet Gail Huntington. So I arranged the trip to the vineyard, and Stan and I drove from Mystic. He was staying with me. He's the only person ever allowed to smoke in my apartment. And we drove over to Woods Hole and stayed with Tom Gu and stayed with Jacek Sulinowski, wonderful singer. And then the next day we took the ferry over to the vineyard, and Gail Huntington met us at the ferry in his Volkswagen Squareback. And if you remember Volkswagen Squarebacks, they were quite small. And so Stan and Gail were in the front, and Tom and Jacek and I am 6'4", squeezed into the back of this car. And we drove over to Gail's house, which was absolutely wonderful. And Gail's wife, Mildred, was there and had made sandwiches. And we had iced tea and sandwiches. And it was just as delightful as could be. And everybody was on their best behavior. And then Stan said, well, I really want to see Gay Head. And Gail said, great, let's go. So we jumped in the car. Again, the two of them in the front and Tom and Yatsik and me in the back of the car. And we're driving around Martha's Vineyard. And it's a beautiful spring day. And we're going past the beaches, which are filled with beautiful young people with not a lot of clothing on, which prompted some of the most ribald singing and storytelling of my entire life. And oh, that I had a tape recorder for that drive.
Wax cylinder.
Oh, and Tom and the contrast in Gale between the prim and proper New England gentleman that he had been at home and the raunchy stories and stuff that were coming out of his mouth in the car was just delightful. Stan was great company and super fun. I could do a whole talk with you about my experiences with Stan sometime if you're interested. He's a interesting and complicated person. And I'm really grateful that I had the chance to know him.
That sounds like a great idea for another episode. Yeah.
I also want to hear about your time in Poland at some point as well. So we'll need to do part 2.
Yeah. And the amazing scene there. Have you done Poland?
We did, yeah, a couple of years back. Just one festival in Tychy, and we were blown away.
Yeah. I remember standing on the stage in Gajitsko, and my wife was with me, and we're singing, the two of us singing a cappella songs, and there's like 5,000 people out there. And in those days, it was lighters, doing the lighter thing. I'm like, is this really my life? It was amazing. But the quality of the singing was fabulous. There were great singers.
Stunning.
Oh, yeah, stunning. Absolutely.
Okay, so that's a plan. We're having you back. We're talking Stan. We're talking Poland. I've so enjoyed spending a little bit of time.
Oh, this has been great fun. Really, it was a pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I guess we should probably wrap it up there. I'll ask everyone who's listening to do the whole like and subscribe thing. Up next couple episodes, we'll have Dean Kalin from the band Bounding Main and the Maritime Music Directory International, which is a fantastic resource. And then we'll have Melanie Ross, a great East Coast singer who we had the pleasure of meeting and chatting with at the Fundy Festival this past summer. So check out those episodes. They'll be out in about a month or so. So Bob, thanks again, and good night, everybody.
Thank you, James. Thanks, Stefan. That was great fun. I enjoyed it a lot.